Hi everyone, it's Michaela with Elite Medical Exercise, and I have a really big treat for you guys today. I have Miss Laurel with me. She is an expert in the training and the yoga realm. We actually went to grad school together and we worked together. So it's a real treat. We're expanding onto this channel with workout videos, cooking tips, and overall just well information. And Laurel's going to be kicking off some of our yoga videos, but I also get to pick her brain today because she is just phenomenal and, again, a wealth of knowledge. So Laurel, I would love to, kind of introduce yourself, let the folks know more about your background and currently what you're up to.
Awesome. Thanks, Michaela. So my background, as Michaela kind of mentioned, is in health education. I grew up with an athletic background, and that kind of got me started in the physical fitness realm. And I've spent most of my time working in privately owned fitness studios, working with a range of people with many different limitations, from multiple sclerosis to Parkinson's to folks training for competitions. So that's been really exciting and has really expanded my knowledge of training. And right now I'm currently living in Hawaii, and I'm working for a wellness retreat company, a brand new company called Sensei. And this wellness retreat center is partnered with the Four Seasons, which is a really beautiful place to be. But the initiative that we kind of function on, our intention of three realms is movement, nourishment, and rest. And so I get to be a part of a large team of wellness practitioners that help provide that and help people expand their current habits and wellness routine.
Wow, that's just such an awesome opportunity. I'm so glad you get to be a part of it, and I get to pick your brain of all the fun things you're learning and incorporating. That's just fantastic.
I love it. Glad to be here.
And folks, this is also a soccer stud. Y'all went and won the championships, right?
Yeah. We won. We went to the NCAA tournament after winning our conference, and that was my senior year at UTSA, which was one of my most favorite times of my life.
Yeah, she's
I miss it.
Full on stud. I've seen her just kind of roughly play, and I wouldn't want to match up against her. Full on stud. Well, Laurel, I know we're going to be so blessed to have you instruct some yoga videos, and I just wanted to get more into that of your knowledge with yoga and kind of start out with some of the pillars. I know there's lots of different styles and types out there, but it can kind of get a little overwhelming. Can you go in more into that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about mainly is there is a lot of information, and especially now, modern yoga has expanded to so many different branches. So I think it's helpful to just kind of come back to the root of some of the practices to help you get a better idea of what's what, because most of the new styles that are coming out are really expansions off of these kind of foundational practices. So, but before getting into those specific styles, some of, as well as all of the different types that there are to choose from, there can be a lot of intimidations and expectations about what you're going to get from the practice. So I'd kind of like to prelude all of this with just an understanding that each style has its own benefits. They have their own purpose, they have their own intention. So it's really one of the exciting things about yoga is that there are so many different branches to explore. And that's really what I like to think of it as an exploration for you to be able to find what matches, whether matches your current lifestyle, matches what you're currently seeking if you're nursing an injury or if you're looking to prevent injuries. There's different types of styles that you can kind of gravitate towards to help whatever your main goals are. So when you're looking for a type of practice, I think the first thing that you can do for yourself is ask yourself what your intention is, how you're looking to benefit, what you want to get from the practice. And also kind of keep in mind or keep in check your expectations, because you're going to get a very different approach to each style based on the teacher. So part of that exploration and going further is being mindful that each teacher is going to probably bring a different aspect of the practice. So it's really important that even if that style or the teacher doesn't really mesh with what your intentions are, that you try not to let that cloud your overall judgment of what you may get next time, and just keep on searching, because what we know about yoga and the benefits of the practice are profound, and there's ongoing research. But some of the research that we already do know in general is that 90% of chronic diseases are stress related. And that is kind of contradictory to what we sometimes think of being mostly genetic. But genetics actually play a much smaller role than was initially thought of. So 90% of chronic diseases are largely brought on by chronic stress response in the body, and that last 10% is where genetics kind of play a role. One of the things that research has recently shown about yoga is that even in as short of as a 12-minute yoga practice, we have the capacity in yoga for just that short amount of time to turn off and on, or regulate and downregulate certain genes in the body. And fortunately, yoga kind of works its magic internally, that we don't have to really think about that. It's something that's happening on a cellular level. And the genes that are often downregulated, or most commonly downregulated in a yoga practice, are related to inflammatory markers and things that promote stress response in the body, cortisol levels going up. Yoga helps bring that down all the way to a genetic and cellular level. Whereas, and on the other end of it, certain genes are turned on that help improve our immunity and certain things of that nature. So research has shown us that recently. So there are so many benefits that science is bringing to us about this practice that has been around for a really, really long time, but it's helping provide some of the language that people here in the West, in America, largely need to be inspired or motivated or trusting of a practice like yoga. So that kind of brings, sorry.
That's so what ties in with what we're going on now, because we have with the coronavirus, like there's just a lot of uncertainty, and that can bring that rising of that stress level. And I was kind of curious, within your research, does it those markers, does it seem like it's coming from the yoga movements or the breath, or is it that combo that we need to help dial down some of those stress markers?
Right.
And so I think that's
I want to make sure I didn't lose you here. There we go.
So I was curious if it was if the research was showing that it's due to the breath work that yoga incorporates, or the movements in yoga, or is it a combination of both that really contribute to helping lower those stress levels?
That's a really good question. I think the research, like you said, is showing both, but for complete different reasons. Both separately have those kinds of benefits, but when you bring those two elements together, as in a yoga practice, those benefits together are compounded and create a larger atmosphere of wellness within the body. So what we know is that the breath is the only autonomic function in the body that we can fluctuate between our body controlling it by itself without us thinking, or we can consciously regulate our breath. And there are benefits to both. Fortunately, we don't have to think about our breath all the time. or maybe we'd be kind of in trouble. How many of us actually think about our breath most of the time anyways? But when we do, the research shows that there are profound benefits, not only to the brain, but to the nervous system, which obviously sends messages to the brain. So the breath really has a great capacity to influence our nervous system, which largely is responsible for which stress state we're in our body. And we can really tap into that. And I'll get a little bit more into some, I was going to talk a little bit more about some breath stuff here in a little bit, but the breath is really where we can gather a sense of control of the response that's happening in our body, and we're attention to it, and begin to specifically elongate our exhales. That can really play a profound role on settling our nervous system, settling symptoms of anxiety, settling symptoms of depression. Research has shown us all of these things that we experience quite a lot in our Western culture that can be influenced with something as simple as paying attention to your breath.
Right.
So we do know that in harmony with movement, whether it's static movement, dynamic movement, or strength training, breath focus and awareness in combination with physical stress on the body, because that's what movement is. We're placing stress on the body, and that's okay, and that's generally safe. It's when we come into some faulty movement patterns that can be compromised. But safe, healthy, functional movement in partnership with mindful breathing together to be the main focuses of yoga, of a lot of yoga practices, are largely what influence our entire internal system. So I hope that kind of answered your question the way you were looking.
It did, and I think you know, on the strength end of things, it can't be just one thing. I think we need multiple layers that kind of monitor different avenues, and this is why yoga is such a great avenue to tap into instead of just strength or just cardio, because it does bring that awareness and that breath connection, and that's just so huge. And so I'm so glad that we have you as a resource, but tapping into that connection and that breath is just huge, and I know you're going to get more into that.
Right. Well, just to kind of piggyback off of something you just said, like how important it is for our body to change up our movement patterns. You know, we get really comfortable, and initially, oftentimes we see a lot of results initially whenever we adopt a new habit. So say someone who goes from a mainly sedentary lifestyle to walking on the treadmill for 20 minutes a day, for the first few weeks might see pretty profound results, you know, but after that, there is going to be a period of time where our body adapts. Our body is a compensation machine. It's adaptable, and it's designed to adapt. So when we get to that point where we're adapting and we're no longer gaining the same, you know, variation or scope of benefits, that's a really good time to either build on that habit and add something to it, add another dynamic phase, or add another entire segment to your routine, so that we can avoid what's called pattern overload. And that's where when you are consistently repeating the same pattern of motion, it causes muscular imbalances and abnormal stress on the body. And one of the benefits, kind of coming back to yoga and dynamic strength training, as I know you professionally provide, is that we kind of come into a space where we're correcting some of those imbalances. We're correcting those pattern overloads where there's certain muscles in the area that are carrying more tension because of our posture than others. So yoga is able to, similarly to safe strength training, is able to really address some of those limited joint range of motion, muscular imbalances, joint stress because of our posture, neuromuscular efficiency, how well can I fully contract the muscle, and as well as many other things that largely involve a certain element of flexibility. But I do think one of the biggest barriers, in my opinion, that I've heard from people who, have heard of yoga or want to try yoga, but they think that they have to get themselves to a certain space physically before they can do it. Yoga is, and that's, I think, largely due to the way media has portrayed yoga. But you do not need to be skinny. You do not need to be flexible. You do not need to be fit. There is a style of yoga, and the wonderful thing about yoga is that every posture, even the most complicated ones, have a foundational starting point, and that's where you begin. So yoga has a way of kind of meeting you where you are. There are variables that can always be adapted for whatever limitations you're working with. I know that your clientele are maybe coming from post-rehabilitation or even prehabilitation. They're trying to prevent a new injury from happening. And yoga can kind of complement some of those really important and critical strength training regimens that are needed to help increase joint range of motion to be able to get a more full contraction in your strength training. So there's a lot of harmony that can come with strength training and yoga. It doesn't have to be one or the other, and one is not going to inhibit the other, if that makes sense too.
And I think
another
thing where yoga kind of gets put in this box, and I think yoga and even strength training, like, it's more than this little box that we give it credit for. And so it's not just a passive stretch, lay down.
Right.
I always kind of have people that will go to a class and they'll be surprised of how challenging it can be. And again, that's kind of your intention of when you're going into the class, but sometimes I don't think yoga gets enough credit for what it
Right, absolutely. And I think that speaks to a really good point. And that comes back to the initial talk of expectations, what we think we're going to get. So I guess that's a good segue to kind of introduce just a handful of styles of yoga and kind of transition to, well, how do you even pick? And I'd like to approach that from what you just said, a stretching perspective, kind of like asking yourself what it is that you really need and kind of working your way into a practice from there. So just a handful. I'm not going to go into any of the modern styles like core power yoga or, I don't know. There are so many strength training yoga or yoga with weights. So that's not, I'm kind of coming back to the basics of the foundational practices.
Years and years and years.
Right. Which has been around for centuries. Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the very first styles of practice that is still very prevalent right now is a practice called Hatha Yoga. And that is a blended practice of dynamic movements at a slower pace, depending on the teacher, but in general, traditionally at a slower pace, with some more progressive, advanced practices at the end. But again, there are modifications, variations, and all levels can practice this style. So it's a very safe, kind of good place to start type of practice. There's also a yin style, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Yin is going to be more of passive stretching, which I'll get into in a little bit, more sedentary. In a yin class, you may do 8 to 10 postures the whole class. And then, which is oftentimes confused with restorative, which I think is a really, probably one of the most, at least at this time with such high stress levels, a really great practice to help people kind of just settle down. Restorative practice uses a lot of props to help place you in a posture that is intended to restore. It's very passive. You may do 3 to 5 postures in a class, in an hour-long class. So you're holding the postures significantly longer. And in contrast to yin does not use much props at all. So you're kind of leveraging your own body weight in addition to gravity to help kind of guide you into more passive stretching that's not as supported, and that's not intended to make it sound unsafe. This is also a practice that's been around for a really long time, but that's just kind of some of the differences. Yin and restorative are probably most closely related in this respect. And then you work your way up to more dynamic practices. Like Vinyasa is a very popular style and a very popular word now. Vinyasa is a practice that links breath with movement. So traditionally, every breath in or out is going to be a new movement. So you may inhale to stand up. You may exhale to fold down. You might inhale to lift up. You might exhale to go back. So every movement is a breath, and it's a really nice harmonizing practice to build strength, but also help with things like cardiorespiratory wellness and fitness. So that can be a more dynamic and sometimes a more vigorous practice, depending on the teacher. And probably, and that kind of leads me into the last one I wanted to mention, probably one of the most advanced types of practices is called Ashtanga. And this is a practice that is very disciplined, where traditionally you begin with one posture, and until you master that posture, you're not able to go on to the next posture. That's very traditionally done. And by all means, you can go on to the next postures, but my point is there's a sequence, there's an ordered sequence, intentional sequence to that practice, and you're going to do the same sequence every single time. So Ashtanga is a certain cluster of postures done in order. So there's much more structure to it, where Vinyasa is something that's more free-flowing and can change, and you can go to 10 Vinyasa classes and not do the same sequence. So that's just a little bit about the practice. I would say great places to start would be with the Hatha, Yin, Vinyasa, and restorative practices. You can look for different studios that offer those types of practices, but a lot of places now simply have classes titled beginner yoga or gentle flow, and that's going to be a much slower, softer, gentler pace of a vinyasa. Anytime you see flow, that's going to be indicative for the most part of a vinyasa class. So when you are choosing between one of these styles, I think there's a few things that I kind of mentioned at the beginning that are important to note whenever you're going into a class. Is firstly, you can go to the same class taught by a different teacher and have a totally different experience.
Yeah, for sure.
So keep in mind that the styles are different, and that's okay. That's one of the beautiful things about yoga, is that it's varying. And so when you're looking for a teacher, there's obviously an ideal educational background or a self-practice that the teacher is also kind of walking the walk and talking the talk with. And you can check in on their background of, is this person trained? Does this person have a 200 or a 500-hour teacher training background? How long have they been teaching? Similar questions that you'd ask when you're looking for a personal trainer. And I do think it is that important, because anytime that you are permitting someone else to guide your body through new movements or movement in general, let alone, your body weight, let alone with weight, added resistance, it is really important that there's a certain level of trust with that person, and that you've done a little bit of research, I suggest, of their background and their knowledge base. So just as you would choose a personal trainer, and the folks that work with you, Michaela, know that you are extremely knowledgeable, extremely credible. You're doing continuing education all the time. I know that. And those are the same kind of qualities you want to look for in a yoga teacher. The style is going to kind of come down to the things that I just mentioned, but also your personality. We fluctuate in our moods, and that can really change our desire of what we're looking for. So one of the things that I like about yoga is, how am I feeling today? I'm feeling a little bit more lethargic. I need to rest and recover. It's my recovery day from my strength training workout. I might be more inclined to do a restorative or a yin class or a gentle flow class. If I didn't get to do my cardio today, but I need to do something, I didn't get to make it to the gym today, but I need to do something, I might do a moderate Vinyasa class, or even a Hatha class, just to kind of get some blood flow moving. So, depending on what your needs are, and again, coming back to your intentions, that's a really good place to kind of help direct you. What is it that you need today, or maybe for this month if you have a goal? And also, when you're looking for a class, I like to kind of talk about the headspace that to be in, to go into a class. Again, we tend to have a lot of expectations, not only about our environment and the people around us, but about ourselves. And yoga can be deceptively challenging at sometimes, but that's also part of the purpose. The larger work at play for something as ancient and impactful as a yoga practice is the work that's happening on the inner level. And so when we kind of go in to a practice like yoga with these expectations that we're going to do everything perfectly, that's a misconception, and that's a false perception, because people spend their lives practicing yoga and don't get it perfectly right. So I think that's also part of our Western society cultural norms, is to expect perfection. We want immediate results. And yoga is a practice for the long term, because we're, constantly working on improving our internal environment, improving ourselves, working on our own self-talk. And so if we go into a yoga class, beating ourselves up about not being able to do a posture the way the person next to us is doing, it's really defeating the purpose. And one of the beautiful things, if you can get past that initial kind of, mental self-talk, that chatter, is the ability to be able to regulate that internal environment a little bit more.
I'm so glad.
I've said a lot. Yeah.
I'm so glad you hit on that. I think you hit some 3 huge major points, not just in yoga, but I know we are kind of going on this new journey of virtual training and having online options. And so, we hope to be a great resource. We don't want to be the only resource, but when you do go on and try these other programs, you do need to kind of do your homework on what that instructor's focus is. Is it in line where your goals are? If you potentially have kind of a shoulder that's giving you a little bit of pain, especially at night, and you're signing up for that they have a lot of plank, a lot of push-ups, that may not serve you the best way. So there's still a lot of room for you to enter before just hopping on one side or the other, because you want to be serving your body, especially in this time, and not just signing up and potentially causing harm down the road. And then even if you hop on one channel and you kind of give an instructor a try, and it's a Hatha class, and you're like, I didn't really feel that. Give yourself grace to try another Hatha class with another instructor.
Yes.
There's just so many benefits of hearing different instructors to begin with. And then Laurel's even helped me on the expectations. Sometimes I have had this really high expectations, and I would call Laurel, be all upset, and she would be like, well, what's your expectation? You know, you're like, why don't you
Yeah.
slow that down? And I think that's huge that, you know, giving ourselves grace and giving each other
Mm-hmm.
grace can be incorporated into this, and kind of letting your body tell you what you need to do versus demanding it to do 100 squats. It may not be doing
Right.
that today, and that is so okay. And I think giving
Yeah.
ourselves permission in that, and some days you had a really awesome workout, and the next day you kicked your butt and you need something more restorative, and giving yourself permission to not kick your butt again the next day, and really honoring and listening to your body. And again, yoga is a good tool to help kind of teach us those things. So I'm so
Right.
glad you hit on those. I think they're so important.
Right. Absolutely. And, you know, as I kind of mentioned, seeking out a yoga teacher in the same way that you seek out a strength coach or a personal trainer is so important. And something else to kind of look for, just that came up off the top of my head, is look for a teacher that offers those modifications.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're going to a class, they may not ask you what some of your physical limitations are. They're going to take you through the class that they created, and hopefully when they see people in postures, they make adjustments. But if you are working with some pretty significant limitations, I would highly suggest doing one-on-one yoga training in the same way you do personal training. Get some individual attention, especially if you're a beginner. A good way to learn is one-on-one, and you can learn how to use the props correctly and to your own liking, because a lot of times when you're in a class, the props may not be initiated, but you may need to use those props under your hands in a downward facing dog to take some pressure off of your shoulder. Even if the teacher, you can know to do that and go there, and it's okay. But if you don't know to go there, that's where some issues can come up. So I would definitely encourage working with someone one-on-one, or doing a little bit of research about how to use the props.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think another, because you use props can use it to make it potentially just a little bit more available, or it can challenge you. So it doesn't mean if
yes. Oh, that's so right.
it's a cheat by any means.
No,
Times when
there's so many ways you can go with it. That's
yeah,
true.
and a lot of times if you kind of scale it down just a little bit, it's actually harder.
Right.
You
And
know,
that's the funny thing about doing things correctly. Like, it
yes,
should feel harder when you're doing it correctly. And that actually kind of brings me to this idea of relative flexibility. And that's where our body compensates for particular movement patterns or limitations in order to take the path of least resistance. And a lot of times we do that. And, you know, yeah, a pose looks really great if we're deeper in it, maybe. But if we're doing it incorrectly, we kind of come back to those pattern overloads or muscular imbalances that we are inhibiting, or that we are facilitating by doing these postures wrong. Whereas if we can just take that prop and bring ourselves up just a little bit, enough to really elongate or take a little bit of compression out of the vertebrae, it can make or break, you know, the long-term difference of the posture.
yeah.
I don't know, how are we doing? Okay on time, Michaela? Can I touch on?
We're at 30 minutes.
Woo! Okay. Can I touch briefly on different types of flexibility and how to choose what type of practice to go in like 2 minutes? Can I sum that up?
Yes. And
okay.
And if we don't hit everything today, like let's put it back on.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is actually, this part is probably could be its own discussion. So I'll just kind of briefly touch on the topic points, and that can segue us into the next time. But so there's different types of flexibility on the flexibility continuum. There's corrective flexibility, which is going to involve self-myofascial release, and static stretching, which is most common, which we tend to know the best. This type, and then there's also active flexibility, which is also involves at times self-myofascial release and active isolated stretching, where you're more contracting one muscle group in order to lengthen another muscle group. And that's going to be kind of your Vinyasa type of practices, the Ashtanga for sure, whereas static stretching may be more Yin or Hatha or restorative. And then you have functional flexibility, which is more dynamic type of stretching that you're going to see in like sports specific warm-ups. You probably do some type of dynamic warm up with your clients whenever you're working with them before their session. And so there's these 3 different tiers of flexibility. And based on what you need, you can kind of that's another avenue to help you choose what style of yoga practice you go into, but we can touch on that a little bit more next time.
Yeah, I will absolutely love to get on more of that, because that ties in to what Elite Medical Exercise is doing. We have a proponent of medical exercise, but I'm also adding in a component that really highlights mobility. And so flexibility is an awesome thing. So depending on the avenue of what you're looking for and what you're looking for to gain, that restorative, that yin, yoga is good to kind of gather flexibility, or just kind of just taking it down a little bit because of your body.
Right.
Right. But also there's other styles of yoga that can be really active. And with that activity, when you're tensing up your body, that's iration. And so a lot of times that iration can gather more cells into that area. And when you're able to do that, you are potentially gaining that opportunity to change that tissue, which in turn will create more mobility. And we're going to be really adding more of that into this and expanding on that as well. So I'd love to open that up with you on our next one that we'll do. So thank you for being.
Thank you so much, Michaela. This is fun. I love it.
You're such a delight and a wealth of knowledge. It's so fun to pick your brain. So really looking forward to the next topic that we'll do, and we'll kind of go more in detail of what types of stretching, the different benefits, and what's appropriate based on what you're looking for. But stay tuned, because Laurel is going to be following up with her own yoga class onto the channel, and she's so talented. This is really definitely a gift of hers. So hit subscribe so you can catch that video. Thank y'all so much for joining. Laurel, thank you so much. This is just
thank you so much.
So check it out, guys. EMX family, I'm giving you a virtual hug. We're in it together.